Here we are with a flattened bottom and nothing to cover it up with. In this episode, it's time to make the last big part, the bottom sheet. As mentioned before, the bottom of this paddleboard is almost completely flat, so I'm going to make a sheet separately on my work table and attach it to the frame later on as a single piece. First, I need an idea for the design. It's pretty much a blank canvas at this point. After doing an inventory of wood remaining after finishing the deck, it was quickly apparent that there weren't enough full-length strips to cover the bottom, but there was a big pile of random offcuts and some short rough lumber. Using the form of a boat's wake as inspiration, I decided to start by making a sweeping V shape almost as long as the board. This V will be filled in with a turbulent pattern of small pieces in a random but organized pattern that also serves as a great way to reduce wood waste. The remaining outer piece will be made from a single piece of cedar that matches side to side. Sound good? Let's get started. The first task was to draw the outline of the board on my work table and sketch the curved lines that will define the inside edge of the V. From here, it was just a matter of filling in this area with the short pieces. The edges will be cut and smoothed later on, so there's no need to spend time keeping the outline neat at this point. Working on a somewhat disposable table allowed me to glue up small sections of the panel and use these blocks and some screws to hold everything in place while the glue set. This was a great way to clamp down irregular shaped pieces that would be difficult to clamp otherwise. With small sections glued up, I could mark their position in the pattern and then use my miter sled on the table saw to even up the edges and cut the proper angle. It felt like assembling a puzzle. I worked in cycles where I'd do a rough layout of several sections, mark and glue those sections together elsewhere on the table, and then start doing the fine fitting of already assembled pieces while the first set dried. Using this method, it actually didn't take all that long to put this together. Once the center section was done, I marked the outer curve, rough cut it with a jigsaw, then trimmed and sanded it right up to the line. Some thin, light-colored maple strips were also added to act as a border between sections. Looks pretty good at this point, right? Working outward from here, a bunch of longer strips were added. This went quickly because everything is flat and no beveling or fitting at all was needed. With this section done, all that's left was the wide outer panels. To fit these, I first broke the center section free from the table, and yes, I did remember to cover the table so nothing got accidentally glued to it. Next, I resawed the last length of cedar into 1/4 inch thick panels and used the center section as a guide to mark the profile on these panels. From here, it took a pass through the bandsaw and some belt sanding to get them close to the marked shape. With some additional fine-tuning to the edges, the side panels fit well, and they were glued up. Okay, so the completion of the bottom panel is in sight. I used the top half of the board as a template to mark the bottom profile and cut it out using a jigsaw. Once again, some sanding was required to smooth and fine-tune the edge. At this point, the edges look good, but the top surface is still rough and uneven. Luckily, I have a drum sander that made leveling the surface quick, even if it was somewhat awkward to handle such a large and flexible piece. Now it's looking finished, right? I thought so, but after placing it on the frame and taking a long look, I realized the visible edge just didn't quite look right. It needed an outside border that would cover up the now visible edges of all the individual pieces that make up the bottom panel. So let's add another task to the list. What's the best way to cut an accurately offset curve from another curved surface? There are several methods, but I ended up using a router with another cobbled together jig. It worked okay, but the edge still needed some manual cleanup, especially at the front where I had a specific idea of how I wanted it to align with the end block. Maybe I should have just drawn another line and cut it up freehand. I don't know. Either way, it worked out in the end. With all the edges cleaned up, it was just a matter of gluing in one more strip on each side, and that's it for the bottom. Except for a thin coat of epoxy on the inside surface to seal the wood. Okay, bottom panel finished. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about all the small parts necessary to complete this thing, like the fin, some recessed tie-downs for the deck, a vent, and a carrying handle. They're all going to be custom made, so stick around and see how that was done. As always, subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching.